Hello, everybody. I'm Valerie Dimino. Last year, I published my first book. I co-authored a memoir for a woman named Jessica. By co-authoring, I mean I helped turn it into a book, but it is her story. As a memoir, it is a true story of what I like to call triumph over trauma. And we'll go into a little more detail on this, but the short version is Jessica had a very traumatic upbringing, was abused for years as a child and a teenager by her stepfather. And then when the truth came out, her family and her church community and many others in her community chose, we believe, deliberately made a choice to say that they did not believe her and instead believed that her stepfather was innocent. So she went through a 4 year long court battle as a teenager, largely alone. And now, years after that, years after her stepfather did get convicted and go to prison, she has no relationship with that family anymore and chose to write this book to not only bring herself some more healing and closure, but try to help other people, the far too many people who can relate all too well to a story like that. So our book is called The Man Behind the Curtain, a memoir by Jessica Renee with Valerie Dimino. And my co-host this evening is my brother, Russ Dimino. I'll let him
Hi.
introduce himself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Russ Dimino. My book is called Spilling My Guts, A Crohn's Chronicle. When I was in my early 20s, I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. For those of you that may not know what that is, it is a chronic illness that affects your digestive tract. Your immune system essentially overreacts to bacteria in your gut and causes a whole bunch of inflammation in your intestines. It's very painful. And some of the symptoms that come along with that are pretty embarrassing. Quite frankly, you spend a lot of time in the bathroom. And certainly there's some stigma around that. Bathroom habits are kind of a taboo subject. I chose to keep my disease a secret for a very long time. My friends, my coworkers, none of them knew that I had Crohn's. Even a lot of my very close family members didn't know how how serious my disease was and how severe my symptoms were. Um, I have, over the course of many years, come to realize that keeping that all to myself really just made things worse in many ways, because the isolation that comes with this disease and with being sick and feeling horrible all the time and not sharing that with anyone, trying to just kind of shoulder that yourself is honestly one of the worst parts of the disease. Certainly, I'm not the only one that chooses to keep that kind of thing to myself. Many people with Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, which is another inflammatory bowel disease, don't really talk about it. But one thing I did find, whenever I did confide in someone and tell them that I had Crohn's, very often I would hear things like, "Oh, I actually a friend of mine has that. My mom has it. My brother has it." Like it's surprisingly common, but because people don't talk about it, people don't know how common it really is. So I decided to not only stop keeping it a secret, but I decided to spill my guts and tell the whole story of my diagnosis, what it was like living with the disease early on, treatments I went through, medications, doctors, everything, because I essentially wanted to write the book that I wish I had had access to when I was at my lowest point, to know that I wasn't going through it alone. So hopefully that book can be that for someone else.
Awesome.
Val, back to you.
I was going to jump in with a question for you right away, Russ. I am so struck by that shift, right? To go from
Yeah.
this is so embarrassing and difficult and personal that I can't tell anyone, even when I'm at my worst and dealing with this horrible thing, to now very publicly talking about all of it in quite frank detail. I'm wondering, as you were writing, Did you second guess yourself? Were you censoring yourself? Did you feel like, oh my gosh, I can't say that? Or think too much, like kind of get in your own head too much about who would be reading and what they would think?
Um, Only constantly. Um, I started writing this book or started trying to write this book before my son was born, and he is now 11 years old. So this took a very long time to write, basically because of exactly what you just said. My inclination was to, I mean, my inclination has always been to downplay my symptoms and downplay the severity of the disease and how bad it really was. But for this book to be worth writing and for it to be worth reading, I couldn't do that. I had to fight my natural instinct to downplay the symptoms, downplay the embarrassing incidents that occurred pretty much constantly for years. Um, because if I sugarcoated it or danced around things or was kind of coy in how I was describing these things, then really I was just playing into that stigma and that taboo nature of the disease, which is which defeats the whole purpose of it.
Yeah.
So I really had to many times while I was writing it kind of tell myself or trick myself into thinking like, well, no one's ever going to read this. I'm just writing it for myself so I remember what happened and kind of put it out of my mind that this was ever going to be something anyone ever read. Or kind of tell myself, well, let me just put this in here now and I can always go back later and take things out or change it if I need to. Um, and ultimately, I really didn't change or take anything out other than a couple of things with like coworkers or situations that I didn't want to call someone else out. I either changed their name or kind of obscured details of it.
Mhm.
But anything that I went through or that happened to me or that I thought or said or did, it's all in there. It was definitely a long, difficult process because to tell that story, I had to kind of go back mentally and emotionally in many ways to those incidents and kind of relive them in a way, which was very difficult. But I'm glad I did it. Um, on kind of a related note, I have a question for you, Valerie.
Okay.
So you
Go for it.
obviously we both picked very just light, breezy, easy subject matter for our first books.
Yeah.
Um, how did you handle? I'm trying to think exactly how to word this, but I guess the responsibility of telling Jessica's story with your own words. You had to essentially
Mhm.
get as much as I had to go back and kind of get in my own head and relive those things. You're kind of getting in her head and using your words to tell her story. That seems like a really big responsibility and a very daunting task. I
Yeah.
was just wondering how you approached that and how you went about that.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, there's a lot of different ways I could answer that. I think responsibility is just the right word. I was feeling a responsibility to get it right. And and as much as I was honored to be entrusted with such a very personal, very difficult story, that added to that the weight of that responsibility, right? Like she's entrusting me with this. I have to come through for her on this, for her family, for other victims. And there was a huge learning curve because thankfully I have not experienced sexual abuse in my life. And at the time, I can't say now I'm not familiar with that world. At the time, I was not familiar with that world and the legal implications and a lot of the terminology. And I had to do a deep dive to do a lot of research on that. I read the court transcripts from the several rounds of court dates that she had to go through and read other memoirs from sexual abuse survivors and really immersed myself in that world, which was difficult emotionally, mentally. I had to take breaks from it, but then also maybe just felt more motivated by that in a lot of ways, right? Because, okay, as hard as it might be for me to read about this or hear about it firsthand from Jessica, she and all these other people have lived that. Like, if she could go on the stand at 15 years old in front of a room full of strangers and people who should have had her back and didn't, like, I can handle this. So that motivated me throughout. I was thinking when you were talking before about how being so honest about the difficult details um, helps fight against the stigma. I think you said it better than I just did, but that the parallels here between your book and ours, Jessica's story, are so striking to me because I remember her telling me so many times, especially earlier on. We worked on our book for 7 years, so I can relate in the how it took time for you to be able to get through it because it's difficult, right? It's difficult to write anything, especially your first book, but then especially when it's on such a difficult topic, you can't just like sit down and bang it out. Um, Early on in our meetings, I remember her telling me a lot of things like, people are going to think I'm terrible. And she would relate that as a thought that she had back when the investigation was going on and back when she was in court. That here, this was not anything that she did. She was not at fault, but she was made over and over again to feel like she was. So I don't even know if I have a specific question here, but I just want to talk more about in the face of something that daunting, thinking people are going to judge me. This is embarrassing to say, and other people are going to know. I guess I just want to commend you and Jessica to take that step then to be like, I'm going to put it all out there. And I'm just struck by the parallels here where that is a really difficult thing to do. And yeah, it was hard for me to try to bring that to life and do it justice. But I guess I felt more compelled to try to get it right. One other thing I do want to say quickly, because I mentioned I could answer that a few different ways, thinking more logistically, I guess would be the word. I knew from early on that I wanted the majority of the book. At first, I thought I wanted the whole book to be written in the first person from Jessica's perspective, because I did feel like that gives the reader more immediacy and more connection to her to hear it in her voice. But I was the one doing most of the writing, so that was a delicate thing to get right. A lot of what's in the book came verbatim from things that she said to me when we were meeting. And then a lot of it was, I need to flesh this out to make it more of a scene,
Mhm.
more of a moment in the story. So I
Yeah.
would try to get more sensory details from her. What were you seeing? What were you feeling? What were you smelling? If you were cooking breakfast for yourself, what would that be? If you were going shopping, what would you be buying? And then sometimes I was just making stuff up as we went and then saying, please read this and tell me if it's accurate. I want to get
Yeah.
every detail right. So it was logistically a little tricky at times, but then at the end, I decided to add a preface and an afterword from my perspective because there was a lot of stuff, especially from my research and from the court transcripts, that needed to be in there, but that wouldn't really work as well in Jessica's first person voice. So that was kind of a craft element to bring into it that I think helped bookend it in hopefully a helpful way. I could go on and on about all of that, but do you want to jump in with anything else about again that in the face of difficult material, putting it all out there, particularly how it's helping to facilitate conversation, right? Like you said, so many more people than you would expect end up saying, "Oh,
Mhm.
I can relate." Your book's been out what, a couple weeks now? Are you having those kinds
Weeks.
of conversations? Are you What kind of feedback are you getting about how it is helping people?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. It's been very well received. I have had some people reach out to me um, on Facebook, Instagram, people texting me. Some people I haven't heard from in years that caught wind of the book, and whether they had someone they knew with Crohn's or not, just saying that they were really you know surprised and impressed and wanted to check it out. So that meant a lot to me. Um, I think it is, prompting some of those conversations. I'm not going to obviously mention any specific names or any, details of anyone, but I did even just earlier today see on Facebook someone was posting something about Crohn's, and someone I don't even personally know, commented back, "Have you seen this book that this guy Russ Dimino wrote, and I was like, I don't even know who this person is that's recommending my book. That blew me away because that shows that it's starting to get outside my personal sphere of telling my story. Other people passing that on and using it to start those conversations is all I could have hoped for. So it's already starting to achieve that goal, which is awesome.
That is awesome.
Same question, kind of back to you. I know you had said early on in our conversations, Jessica being a little worried about, because she'd already been through so much of people not believing her.
I appreciate the question about reception for our book, particularly. Yeah, Jessica was so beaten down for so many years when first going through the abuse and then going through the trial, that then to put this book out there, she was convinced, and this was years later. Gosh, I've lost track of how much time now, but her stepfather had been in prison for something like 7 years, 8 years as we were getting ready to publish. So, and we'd been working on the book all this time. Um, she still was convinced that there was going to be a lot of negative feedback, not only from that specific group, right? She was expecting that her family and the church community who had spoken out against her throughout all of that to really come out swinging. But then also just thinking that other people who don't even know her, would read this and, like I said, think she was terrible, judge her, blame her, because that's what she had been conditioned to believe. I'm so happy to say that a little more than a year, we published last April, so we're what, a year and 4 months somehow already. Um, that has not happened. When the community this happened in Tennessee. She was living in Tennessee when the abuse was happening, and that's where that community, that flock, as we call them in the book, is living. When they heard that we were working on the book, they did try to stir up a little bit of trouble. They commented on my blog posts about it. And when the book first appeared on Goodreads, actually before I even knew it was on Goodreads, because it just automatically gets fed in there if your book is available on Amazon, because Amazon owns Goodreads. They had a few of them, three of them had gone in and given it a 1-star review, and only one of them bothered to even write a review, a comment as part of it. And he just said something like, some people will believe anything. So that ultimately just, again,
Wow.
yeah, just motivated
Wow.
me more. And actually, when I tell people about that, they get angry for us. Without
Yeah.
my asking, several people went in and replied to that person's review to say, like, clearly you're one of the people who can't see the truth. Did you seriously create an account on here just to do this? So I think it ultimately just shows all the more when those little negative things happen, that anybody who has actually read the book or spoken to Jessica or to me, they get it and they understand that by acting that way, that group is only further proving the very points that we make in the book. We say outright in the book that we know that they aren't going to like what we're saying, that they're still going to try to portray Jessica as a liar and as the one in the wrong. But
Wow.
again, if they do that, they're just further supporting the points that we make in the book. So no,
Exactly.
feedback's been really great. And likewise, she and I have heard from so many people who either themselves can relate or have a loved one who can relate. And it's really awesome to see books like these facilitating those tough conversations.
Absolutely. Very well said.
Thanks. Same to you. I want to pause here for a second to ask if anybody wants to jump in with a question. We've been focusing, as was on Russ's little overview slide at the beginning, we've been focusing this first part of our talk on some of the specifics of the content of our books and what we're hoping to achieve with them. We are going to pivot shortly to some more detail on self-publishing, which is the route that we both pursued. But I want to pause and see if anyone has a question they want to jump in with about anything. Don't be shy, or you can put it in the chat too if you're ready. We'll pause a minute for that. How did I connect with Jessica and build the trust for her to share her story with me? Whose idea was it to make it into a book? Thank you for that great question. I was, again, many years ago, I was seeing the same counselor that Jessica was seeing, and we both had been seeing this counselor for years. Her name's Debbie. And she plays a prominent role in the book because she was such a key part of Jessica's recovery. All those years ago, one of the things that Debbie knew I was struggling with, one of the reasons I was in counseling, was I was feeling really stuck in my career path and unmotivated and just frustrated. I was unhappy in many ways. And one of those was I wanted to find more purpose in my work. And she took a chance and said, I have this other client who has an amazing story that we've always said would make a great book, but she's not a writer. If she's open to it, would you want to meet with her? And I said yes, honestly assuming that nothing would come of it. Like, is Jessica going to want to talk to me? Would she trust me? And then even if we meet, like, is it going to become a book? Is she going to want to do that? Am I going to be up for it? But I met with Jessica and her grandparents, Nana and Poppy, who also play a very pivotal role in the book, just as they did in her life. We met, and immediately I knew I was overwhelmed with information and inspiration, and the story was just so immediately powerful that I knew we had to do something with it. Um, and then we just started meeting more often. And oh gosh, over all those years, Jessica moved a couple times, two or three times. I changed jobs. I was in grad school. I finished grad school. So throughout it all, we were trying to figure out, okay, how and when can we talk? Sometimes it was in person, sometimes it was on the phone, on Zoom, by email. I was sending her a ton of questions. And that reminds me of something I meant to say earlier with that, the difficult material and me trying to step in to represent it from her perspective. A hard thing was that often meant me having to really try to nudge her to go a little further, right? Like, I need you to tell me more. I need to revisit this difficult thing that we just kind of glossed over before. And sometimes we met with Debbie, with that counselor, and she helped both of us in like facilitating that difficult conversation. And it got easier with time. We got more comfortable with each other, I think, inevitably. But I'm just so grateful that she did come to trust me with it. And I'm really happy with how it turned out. Thank you for that question. We have a couple more in the chat.
We have a couple questions for me
Yeah, go for it.
from April. Um, how do your kids feel about you being an author? They're pretty excited about it. The book is dedicated to my kids, Dominic and Cora. I gave them each a copy of the book. I did tell them, you're probably not quite ready to read this yet. It's a pretty serious topic. There's some swear words in it, but I wanted them to have a copy of it. I was on the news earlier this week talking about my book, and they watched me on the news. I think that was pretty exciting for them. And I know at least my daughter told one of her friends about my book because a bunch of us were out at Seabreeze yesterday, and Cora's friend came up to me and was like, Cora told me you wrote a book. Is that true? What's your book called? What's your book about? And I was like, oh, well, it's called Spilling My Guts, and it's about Crohn's disease.
That's so sweet.
So yes, they think it's pretty cool. I think I'm probably cooler in my kids' eyes than I have been in a while. I'll try and hold on to that while I can. Um, from Michelle, Russ, you mentioned you started to write your book before your son was born and that Crohn's may have a genetic element. Was a fear that your children may one day have a similar condition further motivating you to write your book? Yes, that's definitely something that's been in the back of my mind since even before Amanda and I had kids. Um, I remember having a conversation with my gastroenterologist before we had Dominic. I was talking to him and was like, Amanda and I are thinking of having kids, and I know it's there's a genetic component to Crohn's. I was like, is there a chance my kids are gonna have Crohn's disease? And I remember he was like, he said, there's a there's a chance. He said there's a lot we don't know about Crohn's disease and how it is or isn't passed on. He said that's certainly. He said definitely don't let that be a reason for you to not have kids. So is that thought in the back of my mind? Yeah, I hope. Obviously, they never have to deal with that. But in many ways, I, everyone's got to deal with something. Whether they have Crohn's or some other difficulty or adversity in life, I hope that my story can help them in one way or another with any challenges, big or small, that they have in life.
That's very well said,
So
Russ.
hope that answers your question, Michelle.
Russ, if you don't mind, that just made me think of something else I want to nudge you to talk about. You thankfully, knock on wood, I have to do that, have been doing much better for many years now because you made a huge pivotal decision to have surgery. And you
Yes.
talk a little bit in the book about the timing of all that and how Dominic was born not too long after that, and that you can't
Yeah.
imagine taking on the
Oh
stress of
man.
raising children if you were still as sick as you had been. You want to touch on that for a minute?
Yeah, I'll touch on that. So yeah, the way I finally got into remission from my Crohn's was having pretty major surgery to remove a very large portion of my guts. Um, and ever since I had that surgery done, I have been basically in remission. There was a brief flare up not long after the surgery, and I had to go back on meds for a while. But today, I'm happy to say that I'm med free and have been for a very long time. And I feel like I kind of had to do that in order to be a dad, really, because with how sick I was, and like I said, I was spending hours a day in the bathroom and barely eating and didn't have much strength. Like I couldn't have raised kids like that. Um, I joke that I'd have to be changing the kids' diapers and my diapers, and I couldn't manage both of those things at once. But I'm very thankful to have had the surgery that I had to get my quality of life back so that I could be present for my kids and able to raise them without also fighting for my own health and well-being at the same time.
Yeah. It's just crazy to think of where you were at when you were at that low, and if you
Yeah.
could have, flash forward to see
Yeah.
yourself with these two awesome children, and
Yes.
it's just beautiful. You just reminded me of something I did want to share too, if I may, about Jessica's story. I often
Yeah.
get asked how she's doing now. Um, for those who have not read the book, and I hope that you will, she likewise could not have imagined when she was going through all of that where she would be at now. She has a young son and a fiance, newly promoted to fiance, who is so,
Congratulations.
he is so fantastically supportive, including while we were finishing up the book. He met with both of us. He was reading all the drafts. He had questions. He wanted to be a part of it. And I'm so glad for her and grateful for all of that, that she's now starting this new chapter, starting her own family, and it says that she wants to, learn from the things her parents did wrong and be there for her son and have difficult conversations with her son, um and believe him if he tries to tell her something difficult.
Yeah.
So it's very nice to say when people ask, how's Jessica doing now? I love that I can so genuinely say she's doing great. It's taken a lot of hard work. There are still difficult days, but through counseling and a lot of self reflection and working on this book, talking with other people who can relate, she has come to really build a wonderful new chapter for herself, which is awesome.
That's
Anyone
good
else
to
want to
hear.
jump in with a question, or else we'll pivot to some brief overview of self-publishing logistics and recommendations for those who may be interested. There will be more chances for questions at the end too, and please feel free to put them in the chat at any time and we'll
Yes.
jump to those as we can. But yeah, let's talk about
Yeah.
self-publishing.
Do it.
So this disclaimer up front, this is a very oversimplified overview, let's say. You could take a whole course on this. There are many out there. That goes into much more detail, but we just wanted to touch on, a lot of people ask, like, so how is your book? How did you get it on Amazon? Or
Right.
why is it that I can or can't buy it at Barnes and Noble?
Yes.
How does that work? And it is kind of interesting. So this slide here gives some basic bullet points that we'll just touch on briefly. Um, the wonderful world of Amazon. Amazon offers you options for both print and ebook. And in most instances these days, if not all, when we say print, that largely means printed on demand. So if you order one of our books right now from Amazon, it's Amazon is putting in a request to any number of printers that they work with to then print your copy of the book and get it to you, which is a huge benefit for indie authors like us, because that means we don't have to put in an order up front of, do I order 50 books? Do I order 500 books? And am I going to sell them? They're just printed as people order them, which is a blessing. They do also offer audiobooks, but I admit I'm not yet in the audiobook world, so I can't really speak to that. Let's circle back to that, Russ, because I know there's been some thought about that for you too. Amazon offers the option to be exclusive with them, which has some perks and some limitations, and we both chose not to be, so maybe we can't speak too much to the supposed perks. I was just reading something on Instagram this morning from an author who had been exclusive with Amazon for a long time and has now chosen to leave it because I guess they're paying their authors less and less and just making it difficult to function that way. But my basic understanding of that is you have some advantages, such as being in the Kindle Unlimited program, where readers who sign up for that may be more likely to read your book that way because they pay a certain amount and have access to unlimited ebooks in Kindle, but then you only get paid depending on how many pages are read, and there's a lot of complications to it. But the brief version I'll say now is, if, like us, you choose to have your book on Amazon, but not be exclusive with Amazon, you can also use other distributors such as Ingram Spark and Draft to Digital, which we have both also used. Ingram Spark is the other big print on demand distributor. And if your book is available in their catalog, they are the ones who can get you fulfilled through orders on Barnes and Noble's website, Walmart's website, orders through independent bookstores, libraries, things like that. Because it's available to be ordered from this huge distributor, that's how you can get into all those kinds of places. Getting into a physical store for Barnes and Noble, Walmart, and the like is a whole other battle that's on the author individually, and the stores are often not super easy to work with for indie authors, so it gets a little complicated there too. And then Draft to Digital is a huge ebook distributor that gets you into all kinds of ebook platforms, including many that I had never heard of before, but my book is available there, so they make it easy. And the other big question that everyone asks there is, what does this cost to have your book available through all of these distributors? This was a recent change. Ingram Spark used to charge you to upload your content, like a setup fee, and they just recently stopped doing that, probably because the others don't do it. So instead, they all take a percentage of each sale you make. The royalties you get from each sale, a little percentage goes to them. So it's actually not a bad deal. Russ, do you want to jump in on anything about that?
I'll just to kind of add, or I guess emphasize this. You can publish the same book to all of these venues. Val and I both did that. As long as like under the Amazon one, it says you can choose to be exclusive with them. If you do that, then you're just exclusively on Amazon, obviously. But if you don't do that, you can upload and publish your book to Amazon and Ingram Spark and Draft to Digital. And essentially you're doing that to increase the availability of your book, different places and different avenues that people can find it and reach it and purchase it. And we do have a question coming in the chat. Do either of you plan on offering an audiobook option in the future? Would you want to record your own voice, or Jessica's? Is that an option? Val, I'm going to let you answer this first.
I'm glad you asked that, Michelle, because I did want to make sure to come back to audiobooks. So I admit I'm not an audiobook listener myself. I don't consume content that way. So I at first was not planning to dabble in that, but there has been some, I don't know if I can say demand for it, but some inquiries about it. And I know a lot of people do like to listen to books that way. So we've looked into it. Another author friend of mine recommended a studio locally here in Rochester that allows you to use their space and their equipment to record your own audiobook, which is the way I think I would want to go. You can also hire someone, they're essentially voice actors. You could pay them to record the book, and many people go that route. If we do an audiobook, I would like to do the narration myself, um, potentially having Jessica involved if she wants to be, but it's a big undertaking. It takes a lot of time, and I do worry about the emotional toll that might take on her if she is the one reading all of that, admittedly often difficult content. But so it's a conversation we've had and we need to get back to. There again is some cost involved. It's an investment up front, but if it might help more people discover the book, then it's probably one worth making. Russ, what about you?
Short answer, yes, I do plan to do an audiobook version, and yes, I do plan to read it myself. No
Awesome.
time frame for that yet. I have to get more information about what's involved in the process of that, but the answer is yes, you should hopefully eventually be able to get Spilling My Guts as an audiobook if you're so inclined.
Awesome. I should mention that another option for someone to record their own audiobook could be to invest in the equipment and record it in your own space. That is a little daunting to me just to make sure I would get all the right stuff and then to know how to edit the files together at the end and have them in the right formats. And that was what attracted me to this studio in Rochester, that they already know all that stuff. So personally, I would be more comfortable putting it in their hands, but just haven't taken that step yet. I wanted to mention quickly too about the Amazon thing that a, a stumbling block I know several people have run into is they make that option to be exclusive with them seems like this great advantage, right? They emphasize the fact that you can attract all these additional readers based on the outreach that you have being exclusive, but people often miss the point that then you can't go through these other distributors. So that often happens that I'm in a bunch of author groups on Facebook and things like that, and someone will say, why can't I upload my book to Ingram? And it's because they made it exclusive with Amazon. So you're kind of picking your audience there. Oh, that's a great idea, Michelle. Thank you. Michelle suggesting that if we did an audiobook, that maybe Jessica could share an update at the end. It can be powerful to hear the actual voice of someone who's sharing their story. I agree completely, and I like that suggestion. Thank you.
I like
That's
that too.
beautiful. Anything else you want to say, Russ, about the self-publishing logistics? Oh, I know we were going to talk about the cost beyond what we just talked about here at the distributors.
Yes.
There are some other
So
costs.
yeah, I'll talk about this for a minute. So this is so what kind of it's kind of what we're talking about here of, oh, you upload it to Amazon or Ingram or Draft to Digital. Like in many ways, this is like the end state of it. We're kind of putting the cart before the horse a little bit and talking about where you can self-publish. There's a lot of legwork to do before you get to that point. The I would say the best thing about self-publishing is you have all the control of the process. The worst thing about self-publishing is you have all the control of the process.
Yeah.
Um, so you're gonna first and foremost you're gonna write the darn thing, which is no small task in and of itself to write your story. Then these are some other up on your screen costs and considerations of things you will want to do this right. You're going to want to consider all these things. I'll read through them real quick and kind of explain a little bit about them. A copy editor is typically someone you would hire to read your book once you think it's done. You've done your proofreading, your editing. You're like, all right, I think this is ready to go out into the world. You're going to hire a copy editor who is going to read your book for not just spelling and grammatical typos or anything like that, but also give you feedback on, this part you could probably cut this. This part you maybe need to explain a little bit more. This was confusing. Maybe think about moving this part before that part. Some constructive advice on how to make your book better. My copy editor, Crystal, um, suggested actually cutting a lot of the sections that I wrote in the book where I kind of went off topic, so to speak. I was given a lot of context in the jobs I was working, things that were going on in my personal life. And certainly a lot of that is still in the book, but there were some parts where she was like, you probably could take this part out. It's kind of slowing things down or doesn't really seem relevant to anything else that follows it. And each section that she marked like that, my initial reaction was, how dare she say I cut this? And then I'd look closer at it and be like, oh yeah, she's absolutely right. I should cut that. So that your copy editor is helping you perfect your book and make it more readable and flow better. So then you're probably going to take your copy editor's suggestions, cut some things, add some things, move some things around. And then your next step is your proofreader. So your proofreader is kind of the last stop. Now that you've made all your edits and you're really sure this is ready to go out the door, the proofreader is the one who's going to give it one more pass for any typos, misspellings, grammatical errors, things like that to really polish it up for you. Cover designer, this is the cover of my book. I did not design this myself. Many people ask, is that a picture of my actual hand holding a notebook in a hospital bed? No, it is not. I hired someone that I found on a website called Fiverr.com. It's Fiverr, I think. It's a great website to connect with freelance designers, copy editors, proofreaders, graphic designers. If you're doing an audiobook, you can find voiceover talent on there. All kinds of freelance work for hire artists out there. And I hired my cover designer there, as well as my interior formatter. The interior formatter is the one who's going to take your Word document that you probably wrote the whole story in and put it into the nicely formatted. It keeps trying to blur my book, but you get the idea. The chapter headings, page numbers, formatting it in a way that's conducive to being printed as a book. Purchasing ISBN numbers and PCIP codes. The ISBN number, of course, is the book that or the number that goes on the back with the barcode. The PCIP code is kind of the fine print in the front that lets librarians and bookstores know where and how to file your book. Printing author copies, whether you get your book printed through Amazon, Ingram Spark, what have you, you can order copies of your own book from them at a reduced price. So you have copies on hand to sell to your family, your friends. If you do a speaking engagement, you can have a book on hand to physically sell yourself. A website or social media presence is not required, but it's strongly recommended and encouraged in this day and age so people can find you, find out more about your book, find out more about you. You can connect with your audience, connect with your readers, they can connect with you. And then marketing materials. You got to have a way for people to learn that your book exists, know where to find it, what it's about, know that it is something that they need in their life to read. The word of mouth to your family and friends goes so far. You got to be able to find your audience outside that, and that usually comes with some kind of price tag as well. Val, did I cover those pretty well, or anything you want to add or speak to on any of these items?
I think you covered those very well. Thank you. We had a question come in from Michelle. I think we covered the first part because this was right before you started talking about copy editor and proofreader. Did either of us have someone who was trained, edit our work before publishing? Yes, we both did. And in fact, both worked with a couple different people at those stages, right? Copy editing and proofreading, which is highly recommended. And I will say I even work, my day job is in copy editing. I think I'm a pretty good proofreader. I am trained to catch errors and things like that. And still, I absolutely knew I had to pay a professional two different professionals at two different stages to read it, because you're so close to the material that you're easily going to overlook errors. And like Russ said, maybe something from a different perspective, something isn't
Yeah.
necessary or doesn't quite make sense. So that some people skip that. And honestly, that is a big downside of self-publishing, is that anyone can publish anything. So there is a
Yeah.
lot of content out there that is not edited well or not well polished. Um, but those of us who want to put out a good product will take that time and added expense to have someone else help us make it better.
I will
Um,
also add, just to add quickly to that, I would say
yeah,
of these items on the screen, your copy editor is probably going to be the most expensive out of these items. But I would say
yes,
it's probably also going to be, if you really want to do a good job and do this well, it's probably also be the most valuable thing on this list.
agreed completely. That's worth that expense because it makes it a better product. Michelle also asked how we chose our copy editors and connected with them. I will say for editing and cover designer and interior formatter, it was all referrals or word of mouth. So my cover designer, I actually, back when Twitter was still something better than it's become now, I tweeted to ask for cover designer recommendations, and the woman who I ended up working with saw that and responded and sent me a link to her profile, and I just really liked her whole style. Um, yeah, I knew someone from grad school who was in editing, so I had her do the initial edit, and then she recommended someone she knew to do my proofreading. Um, I forget now how I found my interior formatter. I think my cover designer recommended her. So there are so many people out there doing this work in some form or another that they can recommend someone who's good. And you want to make sure they're the right fit for what you're doing. They, if they only, for instance, with cover designer, if they specialize in science fiction, they may not be the right fit to do the cover for your memoir. You'd want to see their work and see
Right.
if they have the right style that goes with what you're looking for.
I'm also going to mention again, I mentioned it a minute ago, but I also threw the spelling of it in the chat, fiverr.com.
Thank you.
That's where I found my cover designer and interior formatter. You can see samples of people's work. You can see reviews. You can see how often people come back to the same person for repeat business. You can message them. It's really cool. I would encourage you to look around on there if you're thinking about anything like this, even just to get a sense of what's out there. Um, you can find, and you can find so many things on there that actually aren't even related to the stuff we're talking about. Like I said, I think there's like music, website design, photography, videography, all sorts of freelance stuff on there. So it's a great site for, like we said, stuff like related to self-publishing, but really any sort of creative freelance work you could be looking for. I would say check out that website because it's pretty cool.
I'm going to put a couple other resources in the chat as well. Um, my dear friend April Randolph, who may be on this call, teaches a fantastic workshop on self-publishing that Russ and I have both taken more than once. She's a great resource, and I have her website there. And Jane Friedman has made her career writing about and researching the publishing industry, both self-publishing and traditional publishing, trends, advice. She has a lot of great online workshops that are like $25 from all different experts. So I recommend you check out both of those sites if you want to learn more. Michelle has put a bunch of good questions in the chat. Thank you so much. What advice do you both have to schedule time to write and stick with it over so many years? Any helpful tips? I love that you said the part about over so many years, because that was my kind of cringe at first was, how do you stick with it? It took us both a lot of time. So that's sometimes a hard question to speak to. For me, for many years, it was carving out time where I could in the evenings and weekends, and then I wasn't getting where I wanted to. So I was fortunate enough to be able to scale back my day job to part-time hours, which is the only way that I ended up being able to finish the book when I did. And I also just got to a point of really needing to buckle down and push through to the finish line, because I wanted it to be a book that was in the world. And I had to get into that headspace of the only way I'm going to get to that point is to get to that point and push through this last uphill battle of finishing the writing and editing it, and it is not easy, but that's the best answer I have. Russ, what do you want to say about that?
I'm gonna say I'm probably the worst person to ask for advice on keeping a consistent writing schedule because I was never very good at it. I did have for a long time. I did have a stretch of okay, Tuesday nights. That's my writing night. My wife Amanda, she's putting the kids to bed. I'm just gonna write, and it's hard because like sometimes it's just not there. Even though you have the time scheduled to do it, you sit down at the keyboard and
Yeah.
you're like, I'm not feeling it. I can't do it. It's not coming. I did have a couple. I for some reason, even though I have this great office here at home that I work from and I write from, sometimes just getting out of the house helped. Like I'd take my laptop and go either to like Barnes and Noble or a library or something. It's something about just being somewhere else to write helped me do it with less, distraction. What ultimately prompted me to finish it is very similar to what Val just said. I gave myself a deadline and actually contacted my copy editor that I ended up hiring. And this was like late last year. I messaged her and said, "Do you have any availability to take on a project in January?" And she said yes. And I said, "All right, I'm going to have it to you on January 15th." So I knew I had to have it done by then because now someone was actually expecting it. And then magically, I found the time to write it once I knew there was a ticking clock of someone
Yeah.
waiting to actually read this thing. So uh, it's something you got to figure out for yourself. We carve out the time, make it a priority, figure out what works for you. But there's not really one kind of set answer to how to when and how to do it, unfortunately.
I will say there are so many different answers to that question. I've been in a lot of workshops where that topic comes up. I've often asked it of authors if I'm going to a reading or something like, what's your writing schedule like? Do you write every day? There's obviously no magic absolute answer because they're all always different. Some people do benefit from having a regular chunk of time that's set aside. Some people write every single day, even if it's for 5 or 10 minutes. But like Russ said, sometimes you're trying to devote that time and nothing's coming. Of course, the flip side of that is sometimes you're forcing yourself to sit there and something gets on the page. Maybe it's not perfect, but it's more than nothing. You can always go
Yeah.
back and edit it later.
Mhm.
So yeah, you have to figure out what works for you. I have heard recommendations of, yeah, you treat it as time that is booked on your calendar and not negotiable. Some people go in an office or a certain room and like have a do not disturb sign on the door. Like this is time that cannot be interrupted with other stuff.
Yeah.
Not everyone's schedule or life will allow that, but if it's doable, that might help. I do want to be mindful of the time. We're coming up on 8, and so if anyone needs to jump off and has a question, please jump in before you go. Or if anyone has questions after this, please get in touch with us directly. Or I'm going to put the recording on YouTube, so you could put a question in the comments there, and we'll keep an eye on those and answer you there. But I'm happy to stay on a little longer for anyone who's able to. Just wanted to point out the time in case anyone has to jump. Please let us know if you want to get a question in before you go.
Let's
Did
see
we have?
one more
Yeah.
one more question from Michelle about well, two more questions. How did you choose a copy editor and connect with them? And how much total expense should one expect with self-publishing?
Oh, the expense one is tough. I touched a
Yeah.
little bit on the copy editor one in
Yeah.
terms of like word of mouth, Twitter. You mentioned
Oh,
Fiverr,
yeah,
which I
yeah, yeah.
think is
Yeah,
great.
yeah, yeah. Okay, yeah, I guess
Um,
we did answer that one.
I don't think I don't think I have more to say on that one.
Yeah, no, I think we covered that. My bad.
Okay. No, that's all right. I mean, it's again, it's another thing that we could go on and on about, but trying to give a brief overview. The expense one is tricky. I'd have to go back
I know.
and think about it and add it up. I might follow up with you separately on that, Michelle, if that's okay. But like Russ said, the copy editor is probably your biggest expense, which could run you like $1,000 or close to it. And then proofreading was maybe a few hundred more. Oh my gosh, I need my Excel spreadsheet. Um, Everything else is smaller cost, relatively speaking. Like maybe you're gonna pay $50 here and $50 there for some design work. Um, I don't know how much it added up to in total. I'll have to give that some more thought, but it comes in bits and pieces so you can kind of plan for it. You know, you're
I'm
not,
gonna say I'm not gonna put a number on this, but I will. I think this is a good thing to say that if you are considering writing a book and self-publishing it as a way to make some quick money, probably not your best investment. You can and will make money on it, but the marketing part of it is key, and it does take time. Each copy that you're selling through Amazon or Ingram or whatever, those publishers are of course taking their cut as well. So you're making just a percentage on each sale. So the time it will take you to recoup the expenses that you paid for your copy editor, proofreader, cover designer, etc. It's going to take you a while to turn a profit on that. I'm not saying that in any way to discourage anyone. I'm rather saying the best part, in my opinion, of self-publishing is it's your way to get your passion project out into the world for people to read without having to go through a publishing company or someone that's going to make changes to it or take a long time or have all these hoops to jump through. It's a way for you to get your story out to the world. That's the best part of it. Can you make money? Will you make money? Sure, but don't do this just to be like, here's how I'm gonna be on easy street. I'm gonna write a book and self-publish it. Your expenses are gonna take
definitely
a while
not.
to recoup before you make money. So that's just all I want to put out there as a an important point to consider.
Yes, definitely. And we should compare that briefly to traditional publishing, where perhaps you would get a deal from a publisher. The very brief version of how that works is you once your book is ready, you would spend time sending query letters to agents, literary agents, who then once you get one of them to want to take on your project, which can take a long time, they will try to get a publisher to want to buy your book, and that can take a long time. And then hopefully it all works out and you get a contract with the publisher. And often after you sign that contract, after someone has said, yes, we are going to publish your book, it still can easily be a year, sometimes 2 years, especially since COVID, the process slowed way down before your book's actually out there in the world, which was the main reason Jessica and I decided we were going to self-publish. By the time we had the book done, we wanted it out there in the world. We didn't want to have to wait probably years more to have someone else put it out there for us. And in terms of the finances of that, maybe hopefully you get some sort of advance, a payment up front, which unless you have some huge, likely to be a New York Times bestseller, it's not going to be a huge advance. And then once the advance has been earned back by the publisher, once it's been paid out, then you will get a percentage of royalties. You're not paying an editor, a proofreader, a cover designer, etc., with your own money because the publishing house has all those people on their staff. But that's why you're also not making more money per book initially when they're coming out. I'm really oversimplifying all of this, but like Russ said, self-publishing, it's both a pro and a con that everything is in your hands.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a question from Jen Karecki asking if either of us have other creative projects planned or
Oh,
projects that you're currently working on. Val, are you working on anything else currently that you want to speak about?
I'm kind of sort of working on something, not as much yet as I would like to be, but hopefully I will be pivoting more toward that soon. My next book is going to be about women reclaiming their lives and their identities after divorce, which will partially be my own story and partially stories of many other women that I have talked to. Again, an example of people being able to relate more than you would expect, where, someone I had worked with for years and just knew on kind of a informal coworker level mentioned one day, like, oh, ever since I left my husband, and I'd say, wait, what? This is something we have in common. And we could talk about that. And so much of our experiences were similar, and so much about our experiences were distinct. Like, I don't have children. Some of my good friends who are divorced have children. So how did they navigate co-parenting? Um, so many elements like that. How do you find yourself again in that new chapter and make your life your own when such a critical piece of your identity, who you were as a wife, has gone away and that's not who you are anymore? So that is my next book, which I have 5 pages written, 5 pages that I really like, and then a ton of notes and ideas in my head that need to become written pages. So thank you, Michelle. I'm excited about it. Russ, what about you? I don't know the answer to this question.
Yeah, I have a couple of other irons in the fire. It might be a little premature to talk about them. I will say one of them is, I'll mention them here and we'll see which, if either of them ends up coming to light first,
Mm,
if at all. One is more of a semi-autobiographical story that's certainly lighter subject matter than Spilling My Guts. And it would be illustrated, kind of a graphic novel almost.
yes.
That's one. The other one would be dipping my toe into the world of fiction writing a little bit, in a bit of a more, I don't know if sci-fi is the right word, but anyone who knows me knows I like superheroes and I like secret agent spy kind of stuff. So it would be something sort of in those wheelhouses. So we'll see. We'll see. We'll see if again, you guys are hearing this first. You're hearing this very early, so don't rush out to reserve your copy of either of those pieces just yet. But we'll see if those come to fruition, and when I'll let you guys know.
That's exciting. You should definitely follow through on both of those.
Thank you. Hopefully, it's not another 10 years before I get either of those done.
I'm going to put in the chat one more time. I had done this at the beginning, but for anyone who
Ah,
joined after, here's the info again on the titles of our books and our websites where you can find more about our books and all kinds of other things. We both have blogs on our sites. Russ has some artwork on his site and some YouTube videos. Um, so we encourage you to connect with us there. And again, if you have questions after this, please get in touch with us directly or comment on the YouTube recording and we'll answer there. Does anyone else want to jump in with a question here? Either unmute yourself or in the chat. Thank you for all the great questions. This has been wonderful. Thanks, Jazz. Russ, anything else you wanted to mention that we didn't get to?
we covered a lot here. So I would close with, if you have a story that you want to tell, find a way to tell it. Writing it is probably honestly the hardest part. Everything that we mentioned here, as far as copy editing, getting a cover designed, putting it to Amazon, whatever, like really anyone could do that. In this day and age, it's very easy. There's tutorials, there's websites, there's people who have done it who can help you. The part that you need to do, if this is something you want to do, write your story and share it. That's the part that only you can do.
Yes. I love that. And I think that's some of the most important writing advice is, yeah, to just start. As much as we've both said, sometimes the inspiration isn't there when you try to sit down, as much as we've talked about sometimes getting in your head about who's going to read this or what are they going to think. You have to try to put all that aside and, yeah, just get words on the page. You can edit them later. Maybe you decide you don't ever want anyone to read them, but you're getting the ideas out and then you have the option to share them if and when you feel ready. I completely agree. Just start and see what comes of it. Oh, a couple questions. I'll answer Jazz's first because that's a quick answer. Which YouTube channel will this be on? Thank you for asking that, Jazz. I have a YouTube channel. Oh my gosh, now I have to find what the URL is. I'll put it in the chat.
You're on the
But
spot.
I know what's my YouTube channel.
You
It's
talk and I'll find your YouTube link and put it in
okay,
here.
thanks. It's I don't know it offhand because I link it everywhere. So it's on and I know Jazz, we're connected on social media elsewhere. I'll post the link to this specific recording on my Facebook, on my Instagram, on my Twitter, and on my website. which I'll also put it on in the news and events page, I have an icon on there that connects you to my YouTube page. So it will be on my channel there, which I will, yeah, we'll get the URL in the chat too.
I just did.
Thanks, Russ.
Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, there I am. And then the other question was from Michelle again. Do you have a family member that wrote a book who made you both feel like you could do it too? Oh, I love that. No, I grew up always knowing that my mom was interested in writing and had that modeled as a good creative outlet and a good hobby, and was blessed that neither of my parents tried to talk me out of being an English major, even though they probably had some very real concerns. I just always knew I liked to write. It was one of my favorite things as a kid. And so I just wanted to be a writer, and I didn't know what that was going to look like, but I majored in English, and that helped a lot. You don't have to have an English degree, certainly, to write anything, but it helped me um, learn some craft elements better and learn about the publishing world and get inspired by the professors I worked with. And that was what ultimately led me to where I am.
I do have a family member who was an author before me, my sister.
Thanks, Russ. That's nice. I think we always have been creative people, right?
Yes.
You're an illustrator too, and Russ was always making comic strips as a kid, and I mean throughout as far back as I can remember. Um, and Josh, our other brother Josh, is very creative in many ways too, woodworking and music, and yeah, it's just been something that's always been encouraged, which is really a blessing. My lighting got really weird. I apologize.
Right. Some shout outs to Dominic and Cora in the chat. My son and my daughter, they both love to write, love to draw. They make their own books all the time. There's usually pieces of paper all over the living room with stories, drawings, things that are works in progress. So it's only a matter of time before they catch up to us and
Oh,
probably
so
probably
great.
start out publishing us with content.
That wouldn't surprise me at all. All right, I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thanks for sticking with us going over here. And thanks for all the questions. They've been wonderful. Thanks for subscribing, Jazz. I appreciate that. Yeah, we'll have this recording posted. And again, welcome any other questions there. Thank you all for being here. This is really fun and encouraging. We appreciate your support.
Thanks everybody.
Have a good night.
Peace out.